5 for our journal response, we read Esperanza Rising, the Tunnel chapter on historical fiction, and Crossing Bakchito.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go to the first question.
Yes.
Okay, why don't we just start with the Crossing Bakchito, because I think we all had similar skepticism about the book. For me, I didn't read the blurb about the in the back or in the front of the book about the author at first or the illustrator, so I didn't really know what like authority he had on the subject. But then when I went back through it, it made more sense. But then I still have questions because like the slave experiences that are in the book,
Yeah.
I don't feel like are very true to what the times were. Like, a mother and all of her children, along with her husband, are living in the same, like, they're all able to go to this church gathering and they're happy. And then when she gets sold, she has an entire day to spend with her family and figure out what's going to happen. Like, nope, that's not exactly what happened back then. So.
Yeah. I feel like I kind of went back to like in the Tunnel chapter when he was talking about how in lots of like historical fiction type books they like sugarcoat history. I feel like this was one of those cases for sure.
Yeah. Like, how, I wonder why the author obviously didn't spend any time on that issue, like addressing that was not really how it was back then. So, like, for me, thinking about how we're supposed to be like evaluating our children's books, is that something that something like this, should that deter us from using a book like Crossing Bakchito? Or since that's not the main message, can that just be kind of set aside for a bit and address that later?
It's a good buddy
Well,
question.
I think
Okay, I'll write that down.
I think that the book can be used, but you just have to like talk about it as, you know, it is a story, like an oral story told from the tribe, and it was like, you know, it's retold and told, and it's from that perspective. It's not necessarily from the perspective of the slaves in that time.
Yeah.
And I think that as long as you like make that clear to the students, and that you know, you can read the parts about the author and the parts that, you know, in the back of the book that are about the tribe and the story and everything, and kind of put it into that perspective. And then you could also like talk about like, you know, what isn't correct about the perspective about the, you know, you could read other books that are more in that perspective and compare them.
Yeah, I mean, it's not completely 100% true. There's some like liberties that he took, especially since obviously people are not going to be invisible, but it's a really cool idea.
Yeah.
So there's just some things that have to be addressed, like Allie said, that they might have been, maybe there was like one or two situations where this actually was true, but it was the exception, not the rule, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I wrote that as a muddy question. Is Crossing Bakchito historically accurate when it comes to the slave's point of view?
Cool.
Yeah.
And then like that other book that she had us read, or that we like watched her read a few weeks back about, and it was about like the fence, what was the importance of the fence. And when I got to the first page of Crossing Bakchito, I saw like what I thought was the moon, but it was the sun, and I thought that there's some like significance to that. So I was kind of looking through that for the rest of the book, but then I realized that like there kind of wasn't until like the moon and the sun come back up in the end of the book. And I think somewhere I read that like one of the morals or lessons of the book was like we're all one people under the same sun and under the same moon, and we should be helping each other and working together. So I guess that's one aspect that you could kind of pay attention to. It'd be a little bit of a stretch if you were teaching a lesson, but
So, like, overall, do we think like that book would be okay to use in the classroom?
yeah, I think it'd be okay. You just have to be really, because I feel like students, if they do know a lot about the slave trade and all that kind of thing, they would be kind of skeptical, just like we were. I mean, like when I was in elementary school, I remember being extremely into like the Underground Railroad and learning about Harriet Tubman and all the slave trade and stuff. So I probably would have been a student to recognize that, like, hey, this is not how it is. So that's when we can pull in that lesson of how do readers check for the authentic stories that are being told in the books that they're reading.
Yeah, so some of the questions that I feel like you should ask yourself about every book that you read, regardless of like what the book is about, is who is the author, who is the author's intended audience, what purpose was the purpose of the author writing that book, and what do you want to convey or teach from that reading, and how will that reading lead to a deeper analysis for your kids. And I feel like Crossing Bok Cheeto is definitely not a book where you can just read during snack time and just pass over, because it talks so much about like not only the slaves' lives, but like the Choctaw Nation's lives as well. And like the author is a registered member of the Choctaw Nation, and it tells me that this book and the story is written by someone of the actual like people that the book is about. So that tells me that it's authentic. I don't really know what the author's like purpose was for writing this book, but I really like it because I feel like it definitely shows like a positive light on like the Native American like population and the black like the slave community, because like let me see what I wrote. I'm totally spacing. Oh yeah, so they saw each other, like they worked collaboratively, and they saw like the Choctaw Nation saw the Black lives as like worthy of being saved and like worthy of providing help, which is something that you don't ever see a lot, I feel like, in children's literature. Like it's always just very stereotypically, or it's always about slavery, like it's always about the brokenness of the Black community, whereas this one, like they're actually getting saved, like it's in a positive light. Like, yeah, I feel like the slave part about how they had a day to spend together could be non-historically accurate, but like I feel like that's so small in comparison to what other books portray that community as.
Yeah.
So I feel like this book would be a really good one to read, especially because there's not a lot of books on Native Americans. And I think something to think about with this book is like, what would you want your students to walk away from, like after reading it? Like, what is the lesson that you're going to teach after it? Because there's a lot that can be done, I think.
Well, yeah, because it said that the author, he was like taking classes and getting his master's in like Native American lit or something, and he had been conducting a bunch of interviews with tribal members and leaders of the tribe, and he was just like getting stories from them. And then his professor like mentioned how he should like compile everything, and this is one of the books that came out of that compilation of all the interviews that he's gotten. So I think those small inaccuracies about the slaves and everything are just the tiny piece of the puzzle, and those weren't the main point of the story. So focusing on the main point of the story is what the lesson should be on, and we shouldn't focus on, oh, like, slaves didn't really get to do this. Maybe that could be like a supplementary lesson on the other side, but I agree with Riley that like those are such small parts to it that we should focus on the Native side of the story and storytelling process.
Yeah.
I agree.
I also think that the images are really strong. Like, I don't know, like the invisible idea is really abstract, but like when the illustrator drew them that they were invisible, I felt like that was kind of powerful, and it spoke to, like, you can kind of like talk to them about like the idea that are they really invisible, but like what is this meaning, you know?
Mhm.
And I don't know if it like is just the author's style or whatever, but there is a page in the book that has oh my gosh, I can't really remember their two names, but like what is like Martha Tom and then Little Mo, I think are the names.
Mhm.
Like next to each other, and their facial features are really similar, and I'm not sure if that's like on purpose or because they have like the same face, but yeah, and I'm not sure if that's on purpose or really what that is about, but it stood out to me for some reason.
I feel like for me, this page, here, I'll show you it if you don't know.
Yeah, is it that someone?
I feel like for me, I think that's trying to show the similarities between them, like the fact that they look the same, but the only thing that's different with them is like their skin, you know, the color of their skin. I feel like that's powerful in a sense because it shows that even from different communities, they can have similarities, and I think because of those similar experiences is why they saw each other getting, you know, they saw each other as worthy of getting saved or worthy as providing help and with, you know, but yeah, going back to your comment about the invisibility, it's funny because so in my window I talk about because I actually read this book with my roommate who's black, and she was telling me that and I have her permission to like share this with all of you, but she was telling me that when Little Mo's dad was telling Little Mo to that he can be invisible, like there's a way to move amongst them where they won't even notice you. It's like you're invisible. It's funny because that's kind of how the black community like raises their kids to live in a white-dominated society, and but it's ironic because even though black people or any people of color are invisible, they're also hyper visible, and you know, and like there's not really like hyper visibility and visibility isn't enough to keep you safe. And so I think that part is powerful, but at the same time, like what message are you showing to your kids? What message are you sending to your kids when you're saying stuff like that? But yeah, that I just thought that was really interesting.
That's true, yeah.
I think that's one of the questions on that Cinco Punto site that says, like, I think it's one of the more in-depth questions, but or the advanced level discussion questions. Like, let's see here.
The first one, were Martha, Tom, and Little Mo truly invisible to the people sitting on the front?
Yeah, and then discuss
invisibility.
Yep. So I think that would be a good question to address that, and you'd have to be really careful. It's a touchy subject that you would want to make sure that you're giving the right message.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's hard to answer that question because when I was reading that, I was like, are they really invisible? Like, that just doesn't seem like right, like historically accurate. Just because, like, that Dallas shooting, like, he was literally just reaching for his driver's license when he was shot 3 times, and like, I don't know. It's like, again, like what my roommate said, like hypervisibility and visibility. Like, you can do like all the right things in the world and like still as a black or brown person get shot and like killed, and there's no repercussions for that for the person that did shoot them or kill them or hurt them in any way. So I feel like that question is really hard to answer, and that was one part of the book where I was kind of skeptical of how that would be possible for them to truly be invisible, because I feel like as people of color in the society, you cannot be invisible. But yeah. Let's see. I don't see. So this question's really interesting. What is the real miracle of crossing Bok Cheeto? I don't know.
The real miracle?
the freedom portion? I don't know.
I feel like before you answer
Or
that
just
question, you'd have to discuss with your students what a real miracle means. Like, what is a miracle, you know?
Yeah.
Especially since I think a miracle could mean something different, like for each student too.
Yeah. I guess you could say the real miracle is that, like, the two different cultures coming together and working towards one goal and creating friendship and breaking the barriers of cultural identities. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
That's a good
I
question.
think I would agree with that, yeah. There's a question about the biblical reference to Little Mo's full name. It's funny because I actually knew, like, when his dad was saying that his little Mo stood for Moses. Do all of you know the biblical story of Moses?
Yeah.
The one that split the
No.
sea, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
So
don't know it.
when
I have no idea.
so in the, I grew up Christian. I'm not a Christian anymore, but yeah. So Moses was the one that split the Red Sea and like saved his entire town. And so that's pretty much what Little Mo did in this book because he was, looking for the stones that was in the water, and he saved his family. So when I read that part, I thought that was super interesting that he decides to put in like Christian religion, even though I feel like Native Americans still have a sense of like strong religion to their own. And I felt like it was interesting to me that he decided to put that part of Christianity in his book. But yeah.
I don't know what other biblical references can be seen in the book, though. That was like the only, I guess, blatant one, but I'm not quite sure what other ones can be seen. Maybe like the angels, how they like compared the women in their wedding attire to like angels or spirits, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I don't know. I can't think of anything else.
No. I guess the walking on water portion, because they can't see the rocks at night. So it looks as though it's water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's interesting that would, I don't know, how could you bring that into a classroom? Like, could you even? Well, it's like a public school at least. Can this question be?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Muddy question.
Good question.
Can we even ask this question as public school teachers? Are we allowed to?
I kind of doubt it, but who knows?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you probably couldn't bring it up, but like if a student brings it up, like how are you supposed to respond to that as well?
Mm-hmm.
Because you just don't want to be like, I can't answer your question, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Because this book, like they call the women the angels. So how do you can't just skip over that page. You can't ignore the fact that
My speaker just died, so I need to put in my headphones really quick.
will the recording still work, Riley?
Yeah, it should.
I think one thing that would be really cool to do with this book is get an audio reading of it because, like, when the angels are singing or at the beginning when they're doing a chant, I think that would be a super powerful thing for the students to hear, and that would just be, like, help immerse them in the culture a little bit more. And
Yeah,
when
I was reading it, I wasn't sure how to.
Like, it was so funny because, like, as I was reading it to myself, I read it aloud first because I can't read these children's books. And when the first one came up and it was, like, the simpler chant or song, I don't know where it is, I'm trying to look for it. I actually was able to, like, because I've been to a Native American powwow before and I've heard them sing. in chant, so I kind of like said it how I thought that they would say it, but then like when I got to the next one, I was like, whoa, I don't think I probably even said the first one right. So that's just something that would be really cool for our students to hear because, I mean, you don't normally ever get to hear that.
Yeah.
Right, and if we're gonna be, we want to be able to represent that fully, because obviously we're not Native American, but if we're gonna do it, then it needs to be done.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think like a great thing that this book should include that it doesn't is the translation of what those mean, because I feel like that's something that our students would be asking, like, well, what are they saying? Does it show any importance to what is going on in the story, or why are they singing? Like, what is the purpose of this? So having a translation as close as possible as you could get would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Well, especially for the one when they're crossing the river towards the end, because I'm pretty sure Martha Tom said it was a song from the service that they had that she translated into.
Yep.
Yeah.
Martha Tom was singing a song she had learned at the
that one.
slave church, but now she sang it in Choctaw. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we talk about like Esperanza before we like?
Yeah. Okay.
Well.
Okay.
I really liked the book Esperanza Rising. I felt like my mirror was with that book. Like I could really connect with like emotions, like not necessarily experiences, because I can't say I've been through like really any of her experiences, but like I've definitely, felt loss of a loved one, and like being afraid, and like wanting to work really hard to help your family, and really just doing anything that you can to support them. And just emotionally, I think I was able to see a mirror with that book.
Mm-hmm.
I said the same thing, like especially like how she has like a really close connection with like all of her family members, especially
Yeah.
like her parents and then her abuelita. I really connected with that as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seemed for me when I was reading it, it almost seemed like time kind of stood still when she was hearing from her grandma, because her grandma spoke with such like elegance and like such wise words, and you could really tell that the book slowed down and really paid attention to what the grandma was saying. Like on page 49, it says, Abuelita squeezed Esperanza's hand. Do not be afraid to start over. When I was your age, I left Spain with my mother, father, and sisters. A Mexican official had offered my father a job here in Mexico, so we came. We had to take several ships, and the journey lasted months. When we arrived, nothing was promised. There was many hard times, but life was also exciting. We had each other. Like, I feel like that they spent so much time talking about the grandma's experience and how it related to Esperanza, and how the grandma is always giving Esperanza wise words to live by, and somehow they always come back up in the text. So I almost saw her relationship with her grandma as almost even more important than her relationship with her father.
Oh yeah.
I feel like in the beginning they tried to make it seem like her relationship with her father was the most important, but like as the book like went on, it like they showed you that like the one with her abuelita was a little more important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does this make you see the plight of Mexican and Mexican Americans in the United States today?
I think one of the main things that I was thinking about, like when I read that question and like I was thinking about the book, was that I feel like most Americans today, like they think that most Mexican immigrants want to leave Mexico and they are like desperately wanting to get into the United States. And I know in some cases that's true, but in this case it was clear that they really did not want to leave and they were forced to leave because Esperanza's uncles were like pretty much pushing them out because otherwise they would have had like a crappy life back there. So they had to choose one or the other. So that was really interesting to think about, like her experience and how like maybe some people in real life have a similar type of experience when they're thinking about immigrating to the United States.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting when I think it was Esperanza and Miguel, I think they were going to like the supermarket or something, and the like racism, she actually experienced racism for the first time, and they were like talking about it and how, you know, they saw it. And I mean, I obviously I know that it exists, and I know that that happens, and I know that's the perspective, but like reading about it, like as they were like talking to each other was really interesting to me, and I think it was like a good eye into that kind of.
Right.
I related the national policies and the rise of transnational gangs and Esperanza Rising together, and I put that in my window, and I said that, like, even though they're two, like, not completely different, but, like, different perspectives, they both have the same, both people, like, the people getting deported back to their Central American countries still felt like they were outcasts and like they didn't belong, even though that's where they were from and that's where they moved to the U.S. from. And in the article it says, deported gang members, after living a significant portion of their lives in the United States, are often unprepared for and unfamiliar with their home country and its language and its culture. And then it goes on to say, one gang member who stated that upon arriving in El Salvador, he felt like he had been sent to Mars. And I feel like that's kind of how Miguel and Esperanza and her mom and everyone who went to the U.S. were also feeling. And even though they were coming from Mexico to the U.S. and the transnational gang members were coming from the U.S. back to El Salvador or their other Central American countries, they still had much of the same feelings. Like, they did not want to leave the comfort of their home, and they were lost once they got to the new place, and they were struggling to figure out where they fit in and if they even could fit in, and all the dangers that brought up for their family and for themselves was just like, when I first read Esperanza Rising, I didn't think about the deeper meaning of the book. Like, when I was in elementary school, I just was like, oh, this is a girl who is having a hard life, but then she's growing from it, like, yay, good for her. But, like, reading it the second time, I was like, okay, this is an extremely, like, deeply meaningful book, and how can we get our students to pull those deeper messages out in elementary school? Like, how do we talk to them about the plight of Mexican-American immigration and things like that without, I don't know, it's a hard subject to teach, I feel like, at such a young age.
Yeah.
That's a good muddy question, though, I feel like.
Yeah, how we get them to dig deeper into Esperanza Rising in, say, a 3rd through 5th grade setting. Because I don't think this book would be appropriate or even readable for, like, below a 3rd grade.
Yeah.
That's true.
3rd would even probably be pushing it, just because of the language barrier and the other stuff that is talked about in it.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I wonder if you could like possibly, because I feel like some of the like if you were to read this or like you were having everyone read it together to talk about it, like with 4th and 5th graders, I wonder if you could relate the reading to like what is happening now, so that gives them a better understanding of what's happening in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, and then if you do that, that will then give them a like more meaning as to what's happening in the book and in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel like with that, we also have to make sure, like, I remember in one of our earlier discussions a few weeks ago, Riley was talking about how we should never single out our students if they are from a different culture, and we cannot make them represent that culture. So, like, as we were reading Esperanza Rising, we could not use our students to say, like, oh, how does this relate to your experience coming over? Like, that's something that we don't want to do at all.
Yeah. No.
You like don't want to tokenize them at all.
Yeah.
But oh my gosh, Caitlin, what was the name of the book from our other class? Oh, Dreamfields.
Oh yeah.
Like it's a compilation of a bunch of, like, I think it's middle school through like high schoolers writing, and it's definitely a higher level of reading, but like you could share a couple of those because those are experiences of migrant youth, and they're like within our community kind of. They're from Mount Vernon. And so it would be really interesting to, like, bring those experiences in and talk about those, and then you can compare those rather than, like, singling out students like you were talking about.
Yeah, I feel like that would be a great way too, because like in that book there are a lot of the students that were writing were really close to like the age if you were teaching it to fifth graders. Some of them might have been in fifth grade and they're writing about their experience. So I think that would be pretty cool to talk about with them.
Yeah. I also really liked how there were like Spanish words throughout the book, but there's like enough context so that you can understand like what the words are, even if you don't speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of just another like connection almost that like students can make with the book, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But then also like non-Spanish speakers, who don't know those words can understand it as well, and like also kind of make a connection to that language, I don't know.
The very first time I heard this book, I think I was in like second grade, and our teacher decided to read it aloud to us. And she was probably, I think my second grade teacher was like in her 60s, so she was a bit older. She didn't know Spanish at all, and although there's not too many Spanish words in here, she couldn't pronounce them. And I remember listening to her and just being like, what are you saying? Like, I know that you're speaking Spanish right now, but it doesn't sound like it at all. And this time when I read it, I listened to the first half of it on YouTube because they have it like sectioned off in 3 parts, and I wanted to see how it sounded and if they put any like Hispanic music behind any parts of the book or whatever. And they didn't do that, but when the lady speaks in Spanish and goes over those sections that should be like accentuated, she really takes her time to like beautifully say those words. So I think having a combination of reading the audio to the book and the teacher reading it aloud, if that's how you want to do it, would be really powerful for the students too, just like having the audio version of Crossing Bach Cheeto.
Mm-hmm.
I did the same thing. I got it on an audiobook, and it was really nice to hear her say it, and then like after reading it, and then I don't really know if I'm saying it correctly, and then being able to hear it correctly, and it is really nice the way she says it.
Well, and like you could kind of tell that she herself kind of had an accent. So even though they were speaking English and the book was in English, like those parts, she would have that little Hispanic like tone and accent to her, which really made it seem more authentic when the characters were talking to each other, which I thought was really cool. I like that.
Yeah. But that's another thing that I was kind of skeptical for a little bit, even though like I know it's not, I don't know, because we wouldn't be able to read the book if it was all in Spanish, but like them speaking together as a family, they wouldn't be speaking to each other in English.
Yeah.
And so like, I mean, it's interesting because like, we wouldn't be able to understand it, so they're translating it, but it just, I don't know, that kind of stuck out to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think the tunnel chapter like hints on that too, how like some textbooks or some historical fiction books aren't correct in the fact that like characters, I think one of the examples was like talking about Chinese immigrants or something, and they wouldn't say, "Hey guys, let's blah 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 blah." Like that's not how they would talk, so that takes away from the
Yeah.
authenticity. But then again, like yeah, it made me think like, is that okay for the level that this book should be read at? Because you wouldn't, I don't know if you would bring this book to a high school class because the reading level would probably most likely be below high school level, but is it okay for the 5th grade reading level to put that in there?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just so they can relate to the family dynamic a little bit more.
Yeah. I guess
Yeah.
it's like get the message and the relatability than to worry about the like the language kind of thing, but just maybe mention it or keep it in mind that it's not really realistic for it to be in English with like little snippets of Spanish.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
like the conversations to be fully in Spanish with maybe some English thrown in. So it's like the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have all our Medi questions and stuff? My computer's at like 3%, so I kind of need to like get ready to go. It's gonna die. I don't want it to mess up the conversation.
No, I think we got everything, and we have our 3 money questions, so we're
Okay,
good.
cool. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'll just start panicking in a second here.
Okay. Does anyone have any like last minute things they want to say before we go?
No.
No.
All right, sweet. I'm gonna end it.
Okay.
Cool.